Oh my god, this is actually like. Okay, cool. Go away.
Logan's such a Mr. Cheeto finger.
My internet's down.
Amazing.
What?
It's like, Lamau, Logan, shut up. First of all, nobody likes you. Second of all, still nobody likes you.
The lab thing kind of sets someone over the edge. Do you remember that one lab?
Yes. You mean the two, actually?
Logan jerks off anime titties.
Here. That was close.
I hope so. She's at Poster.
Okay. Thomas.
Here.
Catherine. Here. Eden.
Here.
Diane. Tommy.
Here.
Jessica.
Here.
Lucian.
Here.
Sohail.
Here.
Alexander. Here. Derek. Here. Colin.
11.
Tammy. Amanda.
So like 5 minutes.
Oh, so I do need to comment on the fact that this section of students, the only section of sophomores I've had this year who all turned in their papers without having need to nag any of you.
We get cat
You know
cookies.
how the students will then bug me. We're your favorite section, right?
We are.
You are on your way. That's for sure.
Wait,
Sabotage all the other
how difficult
They can only get
higher than
Okay, I'm gonna need a turtle and some kerosene.
Wait, how difficult does this get lower?
I can get you marijuana.
You really
So can
have to
I.
make an effort to get lower.
Oh, really?
Good. Let's go. I mean,
Give you 7K.
you really have to not do any of the minimum things I'm asking you to do.
Oh, thank goodness. Well, I'm pretty sure I've never
My morning class, I made the mistake of giving them the cats first, and they ate like way more than they should have. But I'll pass them around, and I will make sure the next time I buy chocolate cats, that you get them first.
Aww. I love cats. And chocolate. I'm not a chocolate. I love cats.
Oh, this doesn't help me.
I love the chocolate.
So the other day, I asked you to tell me about some constitutional plans.
Yes, what was that?
Take some cats, pass them around.
You had maybe something called
I don't want any.
Chocolate cats cookies for people.
What?
Yo, give me another. Give me another.
So who had the Virginia plan? Could you tell us about the Virginia plan? Just remember, this is James Madison. He shows up in his draft and he says, "This is what we're going to do." Yes.
So it was kind of like the first document that really projected what's beyond centralized government, that the states shouldn't have a lot of their own.
They shouldn't have what?
They shouldn't have their own policies.
Okay. Well, when we say we're talking about the federal government, what do we mean by federalism? What makes something federalist?
It's like a strong central government, so like not states, but like a unified.
Well, the states are a part of it, so you're onto something. Anyone else? Federalism, and we're going to have the federalists. Okay. Yes, we will talk about federalist makers and federalists. The federalists were the people who support a stronger central government, stronger than the Articles of Confederation. But what makes something federalist, and therefore the definition of federalism, is that the central government shares its power with the states. So the states and the central government, the national government, both share powers. This is different than say, France. which is just a republic, it's not federated, all of the power resides in the central government. If you wanted to find another version like the US, you look at Germany. Germany is a federated republic where the individual states still retain their own powers. So there are other examples. Federalism is very specific that way. So the republic means you have a representative democracy, there's no monarch, and federalism means that you actually have power shared between the states and the federal government. Did you guys eat all of those, or did it go around already?
Whoa.
It hasn't gone around.
We have fun. So what the heck? Why'd you eat cookies? We're not a
I'll be over here
share.
half full.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
Okay, so
Well, you get them then.
My life.
Virginia plan. Clearly, I have to get more cats.
Cats offend me.
I'll pay you
I
to buy us
wasn't
more
expecting the
cookies.
morning class. They clearly had good breakfast or something, and they're all like,
yeah, money.
oh,
I'll fund the cat cookies.
We should make that a thing.
Tell me more about this plan. Tell. I know which table should not go first next time I bring a bigger container.
Life.
Hey, you recycled.
Thank you for recycling. Yes.
He proposed that there should be 3 branches of government, such that he was very Montesquieu based.
Okay, so the Virginia plan has a Montesquieuian aspect to it. So we'll say that. We'll say that Montesquieu
I
clearly
totally
has
can
some
try out
influence
the
on what
marker.
he's come up with. How is representation determined? This is the big question.
Whoever cries the loudest.
Okay, so it's by population. What did we hear? Remember when we were talking about Virginia before? What was happening in the mid 18th century, 1740s, Treaty of Lancaster? Remember this? And that sets up the 7 Years' War. And what did we learn about Virginia's aspirations?
Money, wealth, not really
Actually, all those things, but there was something.
And they want to like stretch all the way.
They want to claim everything.
Oh, yeah.
They're very imperialistic. They're like, oh, all that open land, that's all ours. So
It's not open. All the
exactly. But the idea that they were already trying to claim all that land, it's not a surprise that they would then say, hey, of course we want to go by population because we want to claim all of this land for ours, and then we'll fill it with our people. And then Virginia is basically, it's the United States of Virginia. That's where they're going. Fortunately for everyone else, Virginia doesn't get the final say, and Madison's plan is not the only one. Although, remember, I told you the moral of the story. Anyone ever asked you to be involved in collaborating on something? You're like, the more you come with, the more everyone has to respond to what you came up with. So we're going to get a response from a guy named Pinckney. He's from South Carolina.
Ew.
What does Pinckney have to say about all this? Yes.
He brings up the 2 branches of legislative, the Senate and the House of Delegates. But he has the House of Delegates being that it's 1 member for every 1,000 inhabitants, and also it's the first appearance of 3/5 of blacks.
Okay, so there's a few things going on here. It's the first mention of the 3/5 compromise. We'll come back to this because it's going to have all kinds of larger implications. He's going to talk about a two-chambered system. We use the phrase bicameral. Bi meaning 2, cameral meaning chambers. An upper chamber of the Senate, a lower chamber of the House of Delegates. And he's going to say that the lower chamber, the House of Delegates, should have 1 representative for every 1,000 people. How many representatives would we have today if we followed like this? 330 million people means
3,000 people.
too much. Math, it's just some zeros.
One representative, 330 billion. Wait, you said one representative for how many?
See?
1,000?
30,000.
Yes, there you go. So you take off 3 of those zeros. And
How many is it? Yeah, but I can't visualize taking off. Well, you just take off. No, I will be able to. Where are they going?
Why the commas?
one for everyone.
Is that it? It looks like 330,000.
We'd have 330,000 representatives.
That means there'd be half of a representative, so.
How do you run a government when you have 330,000 representatives?
Careful. Wait, actually,
Well, here's what you
How do
did.
you manage the
The
people?
original First Amendment, originally the Bill of Rights was 12 amendments. And we'll talk more about this later. There were 12, not just 10. 2 of them were lost. One of them was eventually adopted. The other one, which wasn't adopted, was the original First Amendment. And it actually said that we should have one rep for every 10,000 residents. Which, yeah, then we just have, 30,000.
That's still a lot. It's like
33,000
one-
instead of 330,000.
It's not, that's how many do we have now? More than
I got 2 more bills.
Oh my goodness. Oh, alright.
Now-
Significantly larger.
Or 100.
What we've done, we've been using the same formula since around 1928 or so. And
Okay, back to 1.
what they do is like every new session of Congress increases the proportion, 1 representative for every however many residents. They do it every session, and so they just keep the same proportion.
Wait, so do like some states lose?
Every 10 years when we do the census, some states lose and some gain. So, for instance, in 2010, we did the census, and that year we did redistricting. Illinois lost 1 representative. Because population shifted, and we wanted to stick with 435. So Arizona picked up 2, Washington State picked up 2, Illinois lost 1, Ohio lost 1, Pennsylvania lost 1.
America gets 435.
DC has 0.
DC doesn't have any representation. They're taxed without representation, as they always remind us.
So 435 for all of America, and then it's split up. This state has the fewest people, so we only get a couple of representatives.
Okay, so I won't talk more about this, but actually, let's finish the conversation because it will set up how this actually ends up working out.
Sorry, I just wanted, can you go over the camera?
2 chambers, Senate and House. In Pinckney's plan, it's called the House of Delegates. We now call it the House of Representatives. But by way of my answering your question, let's New Jersey plan. Wait, New Jersey plan. Tell us about that. What?
So like basically they're saying like it was unfair because like since like they're doing it by population, that means that larger states become like more powerful because they have like more like representation. Smaller states, so this shows the White House legislation and where every state has a representative.
Okay, so here is Virginia. West Virginia was part of Virginia. And Virginia was saying we're going to take everything, all the way across to the coast. And oh, by the way, we're going to claim all of this too. And so all this is on. New Jersey is over here on the coast. It can't go anywhere. Pennsylvania is blocking it on this side. Delaware is blocking it on this side. It can't actually go anywhere. And so New Jersey says, hey, wait a minute, I don't think we like this idea of like going by population. They can be like the Dutch, and they just keep living in the ocean. It wasn't really an option at that time. It would be now, but it wasn't then. So they say, well, we don't really like this, and we kind of like the way the Articles of Confederation work, which give them 1 representative. Every state gets 1 representative. They can send 7 representatives, but they only get 1 vote. So you can have representatives who disagree with each other. So New Jersey says, now wait a minute, we don't like that. We think we should have representation just based on the states, because it's to their benefit. So the New Jersey plan is about states. Do they say specifically how they want to do this? Is it 2 representatives or 1 or? Connecticut was introduced by a guy named Roger Sherman. And I'm going to learn a little bit about. And Connecticut Compromise is sometimes referred to as the Great Compromise. Well, it's great in that it gets everybody talking to each other and agreeing on something. What does Roger Sherman offer?
Says each in the higher house or senate, they get each state gets 2 delegates.
So, in this version, it's going to give us that bicameral legislature with a Senate and a House of Representatives. And it's eventually going to go even further, and it's going to say, well, each of the chambers, these 2 chambers, are going to have slightly different powers and different terms. So the states, they each get 2, and those people serve for 6 years. 1/3 of which is up for re-election every 2 years. So the Senate, there are always senators who are up for re-election every 2 years. Right? There are always some senators somewhere who are being elected. But their total term is 6 years. So 1/3 of them, it's not exactly a third, it doesn't break down exactly a third, but about a third of them are up at any given time. And some states, it means, might not actually have an election for 4 years. So once you've had 2 Senate elections in a row, there's like a 4-year period before you have another Senate election. Right? It's just the mathematics of it. For instance, in the recent election, the states that had, there were far more Republicans that needed to be reelected than Democrats in the most recent one. It's just how it goes down geographically. In the next election, there will be more Democrats who have to defend their seats than Republicans. And that's just how it works out. The House of Representatives, every state gets at least 1, no matter how small. Even if you're Wyoming and nobody lives there, you still get 1 representative. No one. Like 200,000 people, I would consider that nobody. Oh, it's big, but sparsely populated. You're looking at like 235,000 people or something. And so even Wyoming gets 1 representative. No, they get 1. Because it's like 1 for every 750,000 residents or something. No, they get 2 in the Senate, but only 1 in the House. Even though they're like 500,000 people short of actually getting that, right? But they have to get a minimum of 1. That means, this is the important part, that means they have 2 senators and 1 representative. That means they get 3 electoral votes when we get to the Electoral College. That's how it's determined. You count up total number of senators, total number of representatives. It means that when Illinois lost one of its representatives after the 2010 election, we lost 1 electoral vote as well. And it means Arizona, which gained 2 representatives, gained 2 more electoral votes.
What did Arizona vote for? Who did Arizona vote for again in 2016?
Well, Arizona typically trends Republican. In 2016, they were a toss-up for a long time, and then in the end, when it came down to it, they went Republican again. The actual representatives don't. The electoral votes are separate, remember, from the actual representatives.
Yes. What is it? Like, who is it? Why do you never vote for people? Who's in the electoral college? What are these people? And you never even hear about them arguing on TV or anything.
When we talk about the Federalist Papers, we will look at Federalist Paper, is it 71, the one that Hamilton wrote, and he explains the whole point of the electoral college.
How do they get their jobs? They're not elected.
They get paid for it.
Yeah, do they get paid?
How do we know who pays them? Are you talking
They just
You guys are. How about we wait until we have the conversation?
Wow.
Who's in electoral college? Like, how do you know?
Yeah, exactly.
Are you in
When we get to the Electoral College, we'll talk about the Electoral College. In the meantime, the reason I bring it up now is because there's one more compromise. You mentioned to me this 5th. Could you all take out your computers, find an electronic version of the Constitution where the whole Constitution is on one page. Don't. Usually I would send you to Yale's Avalon website, but theirs breaks up the Constitution by section. I just want you to find the whole Constitution on a single page. And once you have that, I want you to do a Control F and tell me how many times, not in the amendments, but just in the Constitution, how many times the word slave, slavery, or slaves is used.
One, two.
Are you sure that those are not in the amendments? That's the important part.
Oh, they are in the amendment.
Zero.
I don't want you looking at the 14th Amendment.
What do you mean? It's there.
What about section? Yeah.
Amendment.
It's 0.
Zero. I'm pretty certain the
Zero.
Constitution, outside the amendments, makes 3 references to slaves.
You could reference them without saying the word slave.
Well, so why are you finding 0 if they're in there 3 times?
Because they don't use the word slave.
Because
Okay, so what is it
connotations.
called?
Did the word slavery not exist? Probably not. It's an
We saw the video
explanation.
we were arguing about.
You what?
Remember we saw the video and we always that was a decade.
What did you find?
Whose son?
It says it's clause 1. So what does it say in section 9, clause 1? But what does it actually say? Hold on. It says the migration or importation of such persons as any of the states now existing shall think proper to admit shall not be prohibited by the Congress prior to the year 1808. But a tax or duty may be imposed on such importation not exceeding $10 for each person.
Oh my god.
Wow! That's a really interesting way of saying slaves.
What is it? $10 a person.
What does that say? Section 9, clause number 1. That's one of the 3 mentions of them in the Constitution. That's outside the amendments. But it's interesting. During the Civil War, or I should say leading up to the Civil War, both sides are going to claim the Constitution justifies their position. Abraham Lincoln is going to say the Constitution is not about slavery. It's very clear that it is a document that does not protect slaves. The slaveholders in the South are going to insist absolutely the Constitution is a pro-slavery document, and therefore all of these people who are, pushing back against the South should just get with the program. Here's the thing about that. What does the 3/5 compromise do, which happens to be, by the way, the second mention? Look for the 3/5 clause inside the Constitution. What does it say, Sierra?
I think section 3 clause, or section 2 clause 3. It says, it's like it says representatives and direct taxes shall be apportioned among several states which may be included within this union, blah, blah. The whole number of free persons, including those bound to service for a term of years, and excluding Indians not past 3/5 of all other persons.
3/5 of all other persons.
Wait, Indians aren't taxed?
No. To this day, the indigenous people they actually have their own governments, and it falls under completely set of jurisdictions. If you go onto an Indian reservation today, like there's one Winnebago up in Wisconsin, when you're on their
Can't carry your gun.
you're on their reservation,
Oh, yeah.
you are technically not even in the United States.
Do I need a passport?
Legally speaking,
What if you kill someone?
you do not need to.
Not an ID.
You're actually covered by their laws.
So you could be a
No, it's covered by their law. Now, there is this weird shared responsibility falls under the federal system where you can actually, if crimes are committed, particularly federal crimes, the FBI can get involved. But they're actually governed by the Bureau of Indian Affairs, which is part of the Interior Department.
Me at life.
That's what I was gonna ask you about the like,
Yeah, it's under the Department of Interior, and no, there is this weird, again, it's a shared responsibility, but you're technically, in a different, non-U.S. territory when you are on the but all other persons is what it says. And for purposes of representation, where it gets to the issue of taking a census every 10 years to determine population for the purposes of how many representatives each state gets, they're also counting them for 3/5 of the person. Hence, they're mentioned 3 times without actually using the word. If you are represented and counted as 3/5, what does that do to your representation in the House of Representatives if you are, for instance, the state of South Carolina?
Decreases it quite drastically.
Decreases?
What would decrease your if you were if you were a slave, like majority slave?
Well, obviously, but if you're a slave, you don't have any citizenship or any rights. You can't vote. You can't.
So then, would it allow people to have more control?
What do you think?
feel like gives the South more representation.
It means the South is overrepresented given its actual citizens, because it has a bunch of people who can't even vote, who they have complete control over, who can't vote, don't have any rights. But for purposes of representation, South Carolina, Virginia, they're overrepresented by 60%. Now, think about this. This has a number of implications. One, it means the House of Representatives is always going to have way more Southern congressmen, that is slave society congressmen in it, than they would otherwise have. Secondly, how do we determine who wins the presidency? We were just talking about it. The Electoral College. And you determine the electoral votes how? Total number of representatives, so your 2 senators and your number of reps. If you are the state of South Carolina and you're overrepresented by 60%, how many more electoral votes do you have? You have way more representation also in the Electoral College. And therefore, that means it's not going to be a surprise that the number of presidents who come out of southern states is going to be far more than people coming out of northern states in the period leading up to the Civil War.
Is it?
And the president is in charge of the executive branch, and one of the other things that the executive gets to do is appoint Supreme Court justices. And who ratifies the Supreme Court justices? So, in theory, the Senate should then be, in terms of splitting powers, the Senate should have some say over, well, we agree or disagree whether or not this person should be on the Supreme Court. In the practical reality, though, is that not only was the House of Representatives overrepresented with Southerners, and the presidency was mostly Southerners, the Supreme Court, too, was stacked with Southerners. Virginians, in particular, dominate the political system in the first half of the 19th century.
The Electoral College is actually.
You want to apply to?
I want to apply to the electoral college.
That'll be hilarious.
Are there scholarships?
All of our illustrious undergraduates, one of them ends up with the Electoral College. The key is to become important in the Democratic and Republican Party. Because that's basically who all the electors are, people within the party that the party chooses to be their representatives. Yeah, I'm sure that somebody's written an interesting history of the Electoral College that would actually look at the changes over time. We're going to look at how Hamilton understood it to actually function, and we can compare that to what it's actually. Well, technically, you have, for all the representatives, so you had 100 senators, you have 535. But the actual number of electors is actually much higher. It's just that the number of votes is only 500. You need 270 to win. That's the majority. But the actual number of electors is much higher. Yeah, well, it means they need to reach agreement, and then they only get there's one vote forever. Yeah, I don't know how they do the proportion.
What if nobody gets 270?
Then it goes to the, actually the Constitution tells us if nobody gets 270, it goes to the House of Representatives and they decide.
Has that ever happened?
Yes, and it's, we will talk about it because it is what brought Reconstruction to the end after the Civil War.
What if the House of Representatives decide?
They'll decide. Otherwise, the whole government starts falling apart.
They'll play rock, paper, scissors.
They'll decide.
Huge tournament.
It's also actually possible to end up with, if the Senate and the House of Representatives are controlled by different parties, and you were to end up in that situation, you could actually end up with president and vice president from different parties.
Wait.
That's the way it works.
Presidents decided by the Senate?
Yes,
Well,
that's what the Constitution tells us.
well, vice president should be the vice president.
I'm just saying, the electoral votes don't come out that way.
Wait, if the electoral votes don't come out that way, then why won't they use the popular vote
The short answer is no one trusted the people. That's the whole point of the electoral college in the first place.
But aren't the electoral college votes like based on the people that?
Well, they can choose not to vote.
Again, I will make sure tomorrow when we start talking about the Federalist Papers, we look at the Hamilton one. What do they tell us about the electoral college? Yes, let's get to it tomorrow. So these are the compromises, the series, starting with the original one that Madison comes with, Pinckney, New Jersey, Sherman's compromise, that are going to give us, again, not just the bicameral legislature, the Senate and the House with separate powers, but we're also going to end up with this three-fifths compromise, which is going to have implications not only for the House, but also for the presidency. And therefore, this compromise is going to set up.
What year were these compromises?
All of this happens in the summer of 1787 in Philadelphia at the Constitutional Convention. So we're going to end up with some factions, some different opinions. And I mentioned to you that the people who are supporting the stronger federal government, the one that is going to replace the articles, are going to be the Federalists. And as you know, Alexander Hamilton was going to be one of the Federalist races. Okay. What? And I'll talk about that in a minute. 85. There's also going to be an opposition. Now, they didn't call themselves this. The anti-federalists are the term that historians put on these people, but they were the people who are opposing the new Constitution, okay, or people who wanted the Articles of Confederation. There were a number of different groupings of them.
How many supporters of the Crown were still left?
They all end up in Canada. So Canada goes through a whole change with demographics of the American Revolution. They're suddenly inundated with all of these pro-monarchist people who have been living in that.
Did they go east and sail up, or did they walk?
They go directly north, unless they end up in water. These guys, Roger Sherman and Oliver Ellsworth, I just told you, Sherman is the guy who comes up with this big compromise. These two guys are actually anti-federalist by political persuasion, but they're in yellow because they both attend the Constitutional Convention. So they don't trust the whole proceedings, but they're there. Okay, they would like to keep the Articles of Confederation, and when they realize that they can't, they make sure that their opinions are heard. Okay? So these two are actually at the Constitutional Convention. These 6 guys are writers of the Anti-Federalist Papers. They're the ones responding to the Federalist Papers, but we don't always know who was writing what. We just know that they were involved in the writing of them. Some of them we actually know, some of them not. They're not as coordinated. The Federalists are very, well, they're much more coordinated than the Anti-Federalists.
Why wouldn't they claim they're who wrote what? Like, why wouldn't they already find out?
Why wouldn't they put their names on it? Everyone wrote anonymously. The Federalist Papers were also it was an open secret. And if anyone who wanted to know could find out Hamilton and Madison were involved. But they published not with their names initially. Because they didn't, well, Hamilton in particular didn't want his opinion to necessarily be associated with what he's writing. He wanted to make a good case so that people are not, because he was well known enough. He was a commander, a captain in the Revolution. He had, there were people who associated with him with certain things, and he wanted their opinions to be untarnished.
So he wanted it to be good, not because he was
Exactly. And so these guys have been doing the same thing. And then there are these people, I accidentally have dates on them twice. I was forgetting. There are actually a bunch of people, these are just a few representative names. There are a bunch of people who were not at the Constitutional Convention and did not write anti-federalist papers, who nonetheless opposed the Constitution when it was up for ratification.
Is Richard Henry Lee related to Robert E. Lee?
If I remember correctly, it's not direct.
What about George Clinton? Is he related to
Bill and Hillary.
Yeah. No. There was a funny article in the Onion back during the Clinton years that had the singer from the funk band Parliament, whose name I believe is George Clinton, actually being the real Clinton, who was the president and not Bill.
Bill Clinton?
Anyway.
Bill Clinton is great.
Clinton, I don't know if you know this, but Bill Clinton, that's not even his real name, because he's adopted. He was actually, Bill Clinton was actually, Bill Clinton was actually raised by, if I remember, he was actually orphaned and raised by a family, so it's not actually.
Yes,
I noticed that there's Robert.
Yeah, that's what I was just saying. I keep aiming to take him on. He was in my original anti-federalist list as a representative figure, and then when I put him color-coded. I forgot. No. And this John Winthrop is not related to John Winthrop, so just John Winthrop? The Puritans? I didn't think that.
Yeah, John Winthrop.
Is
What?
Mellon related to you?
No.
Wait, isn't John
There were a
Winthrop-
whole lot of kids in Massachusetts, and he is apparently not one of them.
Patrick Henry's related to Patrick Star.
Is what? Is Patrick related to Patrick Starr anyway?
So the Federalists, as you know, are Hamilton doing most of them, Madison writing some of them, and then John Jay writing 6 of them. And they invited one other guy who was invited and then said, no, I'm not going to do it. I have too much other stuff. John Jay actually got sick in the winter of 1787, 88, and so he ends up dropping out. So Madison and Hamilton are doing most of them. Hamilton's motivation is, remember, during when they declare independence, New York abstains, doesn't vote for independence. New York happens to be Hamilton's home state. He doesn't want that to happen again with the Constitution. So he's a bit paranoid, and his motivation in writing the Federalist Papers is to convince New Yorkers that they should ratify. Okay? That's his motivation. And he writes feverishly. Madison is one of the other writers of the Federalist Papers. Now, here's another reason for them to be anonymous. Madison is the guy who's the architect of the Constitution.
He's a mad dad.
So it's not. So if everyone had known that Madison was actually writing the Federalist Papers, it's like, oh yeah, okay, so here you are defending the very Constitution that you just wrote, of course. So
Mean everything.
the anonymity was important in that respect. He's from Virginia, though, and this is going to make a difference later on because the Federalists will eventually turn into a political party. Do you know who their leader is going to be?
Me.
Hamilton. So the people who are defending the Constitution will eventually turn into the first political party. Hamilton will be their leader. The Anti-Federalists, they're not going to form a party because once the Constitution is adopted, you have a new government. There's no point being an Anti-Federalist because you already have the Constitution in force. But they do organize. There will be an organized force, and they will become a party called the Democratic Republicans.
What about the Whigs at the same time?
That's later. Now, to add confusion, the Democratic Republicans were often shortened to just the Republicans. But they're not the Republicans, because the Republicans of Abraham Lincoln in the 1850s, while they were trying to recycle the name, the Democratic Republicans actually become the Democrats.
Why would they do that?
You know, I'm with you, buddy. I have no idea.
Republicans are the ones who like vote to release.
Why would they just use them for like a Whig party?
Yeah, well, do you know who
Gaming.
heads up the Democratic Republicans? It's going to be Hamilton's primary, like,
Man, cool. Jefferson.
Aaron Burr.
Jefferson.
Oh my God, yes.
Now, Hamilton and Madison write the Federalist Papers. Do you want? Where do you think Madison is going to end up putting himself?
Mount
No, you're
Everest.
thinking the Hamilton is killed by airburn.
Yeah.
Madison, where is Madison going to put
Oh,
himself?
doesn't he
In
side with Jefferson when they get into an argument?
Facebook.
93 for 3, good job.
Yeah.
The White Sox confusing.
Whoa, 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 I'm a Cubs fan all the way, so.
Oh, the Maurice.
Okay.
I like the Bears.
The whole baseball analogy goes out the window. So Madison, the guy who writes the Federalist Papers with Hamilton, is actually going to put himself in the opposition party from the Federalist Party.
Wait, what did you
What did you say?
Why is this not
So
working
here's the
like I
interesting
wanted to?
thing, because we're about to look at what the Federalists say and what the Anti-Federalists say. The Federalists will eventually form themselves into a political party with Hamilton as their leader. Madison, who writes the Federalist Papers with Hamilton, nonetheless is going to side with Jefferson and the Democratic Republicans against the Federalists. Now, there is, I always forget his name, there's a historian some years ago wrote a book on biography of Madison, and he says that Madison was actually incredibly consistent in his outlook.
That's the party's issue?
No, I mean, I personally don't entirely buy that argument. I think that Madison is surprised at all kinds of things later in his life.
That's secondary source.
But question, selecting your sources is the primary ones. My problem actually with this guy's biography is that he doesn't look at the really older Madison very much. He's more interested in younger Madison. It's like, oh, look, here's all the stuff that's going to happen later on. And like, right, that's all fine and interesting, but you know, he's actually surprised later on when certain things happen that he didn't anticipate. Well, okay, here's a few examples. So when we talk about people running for election, we use this verb, running. That's not what they initially use. When the Constitution was drafted, they refer to standing. It makes a big difference because people would ask you, would you stand for election? People will come to you and ask you if you will stand for election. Running for election was when you decide, oh, I'm going to run for election. It's a difference between being asked because people thought that you were somebody who could be trusted, and you saying, "Oh yes, of course, trust me, and I'm going to run for election." So, and then the other thing was there are no parties mentioned in the Constitution. It was expected.
Washington there were parties.
Okay, and here's the other thing: these two parties don't exist under Washington's first two. Well, he serves 2 terms.
He tells us not to have parties.
How long?
Washington was in retirement after the Revolution. They pull him out of retirement to bring him to Philadelphia during the Constitutional Convention. Do I get to talk here? I'll tell you what, I'll sit down and you can finish it for me.
Oh boy.
Okay, so Washington gets pulled out of retirement and brought to Philadelphia for the purposes of lending legitimacy to the convention, because everyone's worried that it's not going to be legitimate. And after all, it's pretty subversive. They're overthrowing the government that exists under the Articles. You have Washington there, and everyone's like, "Oh, it's okay, Washington's there." Then they decide, well, you know, Washington, we kind of need you to be president because that'll lend even more legitimacy. And again, it's like, do I have to? But he does it twice. And behind the scenes, in his administration, he has 2 guys. He has Hamilton, who's the Secretary of Treasury. He has Jefferson, who's the Secretary of State. And the 2 of them are fighting constantly. And, again, behind the scenes, organizing 2 political parties. But nobody wants Washington to have to choose sides. So they're all gentlemen enough to say, well, we don't want Washington to have to choose to be a Federalist or Democratic or Republican, so we won't have any parties while he's in office. But as soon as he leaves, that's another matter. And so, of course, as you point out, he does in fact say, I don't want parties. He gives a speech saying how we shouldn't have parties. But he doesn't have any say in the matter at that point. It's already done. His farewell address, he says a number of things. He makes comments about foreign entanglements and foreign policy. He's very concerned about the country's role in the world. He still has that vision that Thomas Paine had, that they just can trade and they don't have to worry about forming alliances with other countries that might carry them into wars. The reality, though, is that Jefferson and Hamilton have very different ideas. Hamilton wants a pro-British policy. Jefferson wants a pro-French policy. Those 2 are going to end up really butting heads. Once, especially under Adams, John Adams is the second president. During his term, the gloves are off. I mean, it gets literally bloody. The Federalists are actually going to take measures to start imprisoning the opposition, and it's going to lead to their demise eventually. People stop trusting the Federalists. These are the same people who are going to take away the right of women to vote in New Jersey. Right? So the Federalists initially, they have some good, they seem to have some decent ideas. Hamilton does some important things, and they turn out to be scoundrels.
Why did George Washington not want any party?
Well, we're going to look at Federalist number 10, which Madison writes, and he talks about factions. And factions are the door that opens up to having parties. Because people are standing for election, because they're chosen, it was expected that people would simply choose the best candidate. We would like you to stand for election. And then at the election, at the time of the election, or people standing for election, we'll choose the best candidate, right? It's not about party. It's about who's the best candidate. They really wanted to have a kind of non-ideological system, or kind of post-ideological system. And instead, they couldn't have anticipated that what they were actually setting up is a pre-ideological system. For what it's worth, nobody trusted parties for the first 50 years of the country. I mean, there was a period after the War of 1812 in which the party system disappeared. The Federalists are completely discredited by that time. And the Democratic Republicans are like, well, if there's no opposition, we don't really need a party. So between 1816 and 1820, in a period known as the era of good feelings, there are no parties. And then by 1820, the parties surface again, and that's when we get the Whigs. And then the Democratic Republicans resurface as the Democrats. And Andrew Jackson is the one who actually gives legitimacy to the party system. They had never had legitimacy. No one liked them. They were sure that parties were a bad thing, despite the fact that they're doing all this stuff. Jackson proves that parties can go across regions and represent people from all kinds of different states with all kinds of different ideas and still be cohesive. Jackson is quite successful in this, and suddenly parties are, with Jackson, parties become institutionalized in the American political system. But it's not until the 1820s. And I suppose they could have found ways to make it not happen, but there's too much interest in actually having a party system. And here's the other thing. The timing is everything, because on the one hand, one of the reasons, the slave issue, for instance, with the Three-Fifths Compromise, in the 1780s, people were thinking slavery was going to go away. They're like, it's not growing. It's a backward system. Even Jefferson, who's like one of the largest slave owners in the country, thinks that the system isn't going to last. He just doesn't know what to do about it. So the expectation is, well, clearly we're going to end up getting more industry and it's not going to keep up and eventually slavery will go away. That's in 1787. If they had been having the Constitutional Convention in 1793, they would have a completely different conversation. What happens in 1793? It involves a piece of technology. The cotton gin, what does that mean? And increases productivity by slaves by like 1,000%. So suddenly, what had 6 years before when they adopted the Constitution looked like something was going to go away, now it's like not only back with a vengeance. So if they'd been having the conversation in 1793, the debate would have been completely different. Because then there would have been a lot less willingness to say, well, oh, slavery's going away, so okay, fine. We'll deal with it in the future. Instead, there would be like, oh, geez, slavery is back, and clearly we have to deal with this big problem that we don't really like. It's a problem for people in the North. So the timing made a difference. The party system, I think, again, in 1793, if they had had the experience that they had been having, they might have been saying, oh, maybe we should think about parties in a different way. And then by the 1820s, the country is going to be so incredibly democratic that foreign observers are going to be surprised. Nobody, the reason Spain and France helps out the United States against Britain is one, they want to hurt Britain, and two, because they're pretty sure that the colonies, once they're independent, are not going to actually last. Actually, that sets up tomorrow's discussion. Federalist number 10 is about the subject of how a republic so big can actually survive. Let me see what you can look at this in your own time.
No.
What this tells us is the Federalist Papers, which we're going to look at, are limited in terms of what they tell us precisely about what the Constitution was intended to do, because they serve this specific purpose. But nonetheless, we get a bit of an idea of what people were actually thinking about. In this respect, the Anti-Federalist Papers are somewhat more useful, but we don't generally read them, except for their big victory, which we'll talk about tomorrow. The Anti-Federalists do get a victory. So if you don't have any further questions, I'll see you tomorrow.